about the top of the hour, so we're going to get going. Good afternoon, or like I said, good morning to those of you coming in from parts elsewhere. And I think we have some people who are here in their evening and late evening as well. Thank you for taking time out of your busy day to join us. This is the MJSA webinar series. We come to you live every Thursday at 1 p.m. Eastern Time with topics that are important to the jewelry industry. Usually this is a service that's available to MJSA members, but during the COVID crisis, MJSA has graciously opened it up to the entire industry. And I really thank them for doing that because that's a really cool service. So we do have a whole 6 new weeks of content planned for you. I'll tell you all about it at the end of the session. But right now I want to jump into our content because I have 2 wonderful guests with us today. We are going to be talking about ramping back up, and that's pretty unprecedented. So there are a lot of things to figure out. The information keeps changing. So today I'm joined by Sara Yood, who's counsel for JVC, and Erich Jacobs, who's the president of the Jewelers Board of Trade. It's really fun to have these 2 because they are very versatile humans. They can talk about law, they can talk about credit, but then they can also talk about ethics, leadership, technology. So I'm really excited to have them for this conversation today because I think it's going to cover a lot of bases. We were going to be joined by Dror Galili today, but he's got to do a family move. So he sent some notes in on accounting and security issues that he'd like us to think about. So I'll remember to insert those as well. And some of his notes may answer some of your questions that I may not have the answers to. So I guess I will kick this off by asking both of you, what is the thing that you're most worried people won't pay attention to as they open up their businesses? Is there something that's just like really preying on your minds as you think about these next steps?
Sure. So I think the first thing that comes to mind for me is that I'm worried that people will reopen too quickly. So that the first day that they're allowed to go back and reopen their business, they'll be like, yep, I'm going in, let's do it. This has to be a plan. You have to write down a plan for how you are going to do this. And it's not just for your own personal benefit. This is going to benefit your employees and your customers. If you have a plan and you're clearly communicating about what you are doing for health and safety, then your employees are going to want to come back to work and your customers are going to want to come to your store. So to me, it's just about making sure that whatever decision you make and however you decide to open, you are doing that thoughtfully and carefully.
Yeah, I'd go along with that. I think that, there's a whole lot of both intellectual and political battles going on right now about what's the right thing to do. At the end of the day, from an economic perspective, the right thing to do is to make sure that as little uncertainty exists for customers and for the business overall, right? And so, opening up too early without the right protocols in place and everything else, and all of a sudden having to dial back because of something happening, and that's either at the store level, but all the way up to the community and regional and county and state level, that would be worse than not opening up at all, because then all of a sudden you have this uncertainty and almost you'd call it a lack of credibility, right? It was sort of saying, oh, geez, we tried it, it didn't work, we got to go back, now we're going to try it again. Well, is that going to really work? A more defined, better path is probably a better way to go, and that should be all the way down to the retail level.
Well, and it looks like consumers are pretty uncertain about entering businesses right now, doesn't it? I mean, that's the information I'm seeing. That's how I'm interpreting it.
Yeah, I mean, it does seem like there's a number of different places that are opening up, as it were. But by the same token, a lot of those places, the municipalities might be opening up or the states might be opening up, but the businesses themselves may or may not be. It's actually made a unique challenge for us at the Jewelers Board, because we have to figure out whether or not folks have closed permanently, whether they're closed temporarily, a whole bunch of other things. So makes it a little more complicated for us. But it's some of them are basically showing self-restraint in terms of opening up, Others are not, right? Others are fighting it. So it's an interesting dynamic battle we have going on right now.
So what do you guys think needs to be part of an opening up plan?
Go ahead, Eric.
Oh. Well, I always talk, see, we don't really talk at the operational level. We talk about, what do you need to be able to do in terms of going forward, in terms of how you're going to interface with the what we call the economic supply chain, right? Because for us, the biggest issue we see right now is that we know that the economic supply chain is going to be disrupted. That happens every time there's a recession. The availability of credit, it gets disrupted. How folks actually insure themselves gets disrupted. A whole bunch of other things just get disrupted. And we know, given the sheer scale and magnitude of what's going on right now, the economic supply is going to get disrupted. And we do not believe it's going to follow a linear path to recovery. And what that means is that folks are going to have to be somewhat creative, I guess I would say, in the nice sense of how they deal with themselves and make sure that they can cover contingencies. Like, even if you feel like things are recovering, that doesn't mean things are recovering forever. There might be ups and downs, and you need to be prepared for that. Go ahead.
Well, no, I wanted to dig into that a little deeper. So, like, let's give an example of what kind of a contingency a business might need to have because of everyone recovering at different paces.
Well, I mean, they just need to basically they need to watch their credit, right? They need to watch what they have availability in their capital structure. There is a presumption amongst a lot of the retailers, for example, that folks further up the supply chain are all well capitalized, and therefore, hey, I don't have to pay them because those guys are all making tons of money, so why do I have to pay them? That may not, it's not necessarily the right answer, because that's not true. I mean, it basically, like any other business, no matter where you are in the supply chain, they all have different levels of capital availability. And I think as part of the jewelry community, everybody needs to be aware of that. And people need to basically participate in a way that allows everyone to thrive as best they can in this environment. And that's a balance between how much capital you want to keep and how much capital you want to hand off to your upstream vendors because you owe them money because, everything stopped from a COVID perspective.
Well, and it seems to me there's like three poles to that. There's the capital in the supply chain issue and how is that getting pushed around. There's the legal contracts issue. And then there's also the what kind of relationships do you really think you're going to have when this is over issue.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think you can, so for people who are just saying, I'm just not going to pay anything right now.
Right. It's a tough one. And I will tell you, at the Jewelers Board, and I'll stop talking about this, at the Jewelers Board, we get, a lot of folks that are saying, hey, we're all in this together. I'll just have to help each other out, that sort of thing. And I'll be honest with you, we have other folks that are members that are further upstream that are saying, no, we need to get paid, otherwise we're in trouble. Mm-hmm. Right? So it's kind of hard to balance that. So
I know I'm hearing from people every day saying, what are some creative ways to figure this out? Have you guys seen any particularly creative solutions or heard about people working out particularly smart ways of dealing with this?
From our perspective, it's a little too early.
Okay.
I think things are we're not really seeing, things really open up yet. You do see the sort of people being creative at the tactical operational level, right? You go look in the forums and things, and what are they doing in terms of physical distancing? How do they enable that in their spaces? How do they enable delivery of goods? We're seeing a lot of folks who previously were not online jumping online, right? And that's a big deal right now.
We're going to talk about security in a bit too, because it's wonderful, except for the times that it's not.
So from our perspective, let me put back up again. As you know, I'm not really from the jewelry industry. I'm from a technology background. And what I will say is what's been really fascinating to watch over these past couple of weeks is normally when a business tries to transition to online, somebody has to take a leadership position in that. It's usually somebody pretty close to the consumer. And they eventually, they basically are the trailblazers. And then eventually people kind of get online and they do that. So if you think about like buying
Amazon.
buying used cars online, you used to not be able to do that, but then eventually
Okay.
it kind of moved along that way and kind of moved that path. This crisis has basically forced everyone online all at once. Everyone's on board. Yes, this is the way we're going to do it. And so that's going to fundamentally change a whole bunch of things going forward in our perspective. But that also, would say again?
I want to dig into that, but I want to unwind for just a second, and I want to
Yeah.
Sara and say, okay, what do you think needs to go into the plan?
Sure. I'm so glad Erich is here to talk about credit because it's something that's totally not in my vocabulary. But so from my perspective, in terms of what needs to go into a plan to reopen, you have to dig into the local laws and your state's laws about reopening, and because many of the states that are starting to write these plans are putting in percentage limits for capacity. So either you're limited to 50% capacity or maybe 25% capacity or something like that. So the first thing you need to do is understand the regulatory scheme that you're going to be working under, and then figure out, okay, how can I operate at 25% capacity? Who must be here and when? Do I maybe want to split shifts and have some people work an early morning shift and some people work a late afternoon shift so that they're not in the business at the same time, but that somebody can do something in the morning that someone else finishes in the afternoon? You will want to figure out how you're going to implement social distancing in your workplace. This may not be possible in a lot of the workspaces in the jewelry industry. Some of them are very small. I think about 47th Street and those sort of, mazes of offices. And there's going to be a lot of offices there where you really can't social distance. So if you can't social distance, what are you going to do to keep your employees safe? That means acquiring PPE, getting masks, getting gloves, getting cleaning and sanitation equipment. The supply chains for those products right now are really convoluted or non-existent. So you may be limited in opening up, not based on your own capacity, but based on your ability to get the cleaning and sanitation products and PPE that you need to operate. So that is something that you should be thinking about now. Where am I going to source masks and gloves and Lysol wipes and things like that?
Well, and Sara, it's not just for the next 3 weeks, right? I mean,
Oh, no, this is going to be for possibly 1 to 2 years until we get a vaccine, which hopefully will happen. But this is not a temporary measure. This is a long-term change, fundamental change in the way that we do business. So you need to plan for all of those things. And in addition to that, you need to also pay attention to all of your normal long-term legal liabilities that exist in the jewelry business, like anti-money laundering law and understanding your own supply chain and intellectual property and employment law issues, which are certainly going to be a big thing going forward. So my best recommendation to everybody who's listening to this thinking like, okay, I got to get a plan together, is write it down. It can't just live in your head. You need to write down individual steps that you are going to take that you can then check off your list. And you should be transparent about those steps with your employees and with your customers. Your customers want to be able to feel confident in what you're doing, and the way that you're going to be able to communicate that is by telling them what you're actually doing.
well, and that transparency isn't just the right thing to do. And it's also, to Erich's point, the economic thing to do, because insecure consumers don't spend money, or at least they don't spend it with you. So it's like it's double barrel. Sara, on the whole, slotting in your employees to work, is there going to be any conflict with them being able to convert your PPP loan, if you got one, into a grant? I mean, how do people navigate that?
That's a great question. It's so complicated. So for those people who are lucky enough to get a PPP loan, part of the requirement for forgiveness is that you have to use at least 75% of the money on payroll for 8 weeks. There's a couple of sort of advocacy efforts out there to get Congress to extend the terms of the PPP loan to allow you to have sort of longer to spend that money, because of course there's so many areas of the country that aren't open yet. And so, the functionality of the PPP loan to help save small businesses isn't necessarily actually doing that right now. But in the meantime, yes, you do need to get your payroll levels up to that, that pre-COVID level. And so that might mean either operating your business in a fundamentally different way so that you can have people working their full shifts but at different hours, or it might mean paying people for not doing some work. And that is a business choice that you have to make. If you decide that that doesn't work for you, the amount of your PPP loan that will get forgiven will probably go down. I can't tell you how much it's going to be because the regulations are unclear.
Well, and Eric, are you guys concerned about so many people taking on debt with the assumption that it was going to be forgiven and not knowing how it gets forgiven?
Yeah, I mean, so it's interesting because the AICPA right now, the Association of CPAs, the accountants, they're screaming for basically clarity on the PPP thing, on the forgiveness side of things, because already we've seen on the front side of the PPP that there's been some sort of changes, modifications, kind of okay, this is what it really means, and it actually hasn't been really put hard and fast to paper on the forgiveness. Like this is exactly what it is, right? So the best, again, we are not lawyers. We do not advise anybody. We don't do anything. But from my own personal perspective, the best approach you can take is look at what the intent of the program was and don't try to play the gray areas of that intent, because you could get burned on the back end.
It is called the Paycheck Protection
Right.
Program. That
Right.
means it was designed so that you can pay people paychecks.
Right. Right. So, don't go against the thrust of the intent, because you could get burned on the back end. And yes, there are a number of folks that basically, you can see that they'll see it on, again, forums and other online things of, they took it on and now they're asking, well, do I have to pay people? Can I use it to pay my rent? And it's okay. Maybe that's not such a good thing. At a larger, more macro context, we're concerned about debt overall, because overall, from an economy standpoint, it's been easier for entities to get debt, particularly recently, just before the COVID crisis. So, there are a number of folks that have run that up, and how that will flush out over time will probably depend on the shape of the recovery.
Yeah. Okay, I want to dig into that, but I want to go back to the document thing because I had another question about that. So, Sarah, when you were talking about you have to document everything, I'm thinking about all the jewelry businesses that have still not created like employee handbooks or pay policy programs or documented what their working structures were. Do you think there's greater risk now of fairness complaints as some people get to come back to work, some people don't? I have people sending me email and calling me all the time. Is it okay if I bring some people back and not others? How do I decide? Who gets to work, who doesn't? So are these issues that you're expecting to bubble up?
Yeah, absolutely. So certainly there's going to be issues as people are making decisions on who to bring back to work. Excuse me. And, in regards to the lack of employee handbooks, I will take this opportunity to plug that JVC has something called the Jewelers Employment Manual that has a model handbook. So you can take that and use it to write an employee handbook. And if you're sitting at home with very little to do right
That's
now,
great.
it's a great time to write an employee handbook.
Yeah.
And even if you don't use our product, you should take time to write down what your work policies are. Make sure that you have an anti-discrimination policy because you're supposed to have one. And that area is one of the areas where we're most concerned about bringing people back to work because in the United States, we have protected classes. These are, protected classes of people who cannot be discriminated against based on, you can't discriminate based on race or gender or religion or, national origin, things like this. And, we're pretty concerned that there could be some litigation and some liability on the other side of this if you're bringing back people to work and somebody thinks that maybe you're doing that in a biased or discriminatory way. So certainly if you're going to make decisions about who you're bringing back to work, you need to make it based on non-discriminatory reasons. You can't decide not to bring someone back just because she's pregnant. That's not going to fly. So make sure that you are making those decisions in a legal way. And when you're writing down the plan, I know as a lawyer that the jewelry industry is terrible at documentation. It's just not the strong suit. But that doesn't mean you can't start now. You can start now. This doesn't need to be fancy. It doesn't need to be formatted nicely. It just needs to be a written plan of action steps that you're going to take and how you're and what you're going to follow. And not just that, but it's also maybe including some benchmarks. You don't necessarily have to be the first to reopen. Maybe one of your benchmarks is going to be have my neighbors reopen their businesses, because you can look and see what other people are doing that works and copy them. There is no intellectual property rights in how to operate a business. So there's no reason not to use your resources, and your resources are the community of business owners around you. And that means also maybe talking to your local chamber of commerce and seeing, what standards they're doing and what recommendations they're making. And again, you don't have to be first, and I don't recommend that you do.
Well, and speaking of resources, on May 21st, we're going to do a webinar on mapping your business, simple tools for understanding what your gaps are in your supply chain, in your skills listing of all your employees, and in your business processes. So we're going to teach you some simple mapping processes, and that can really help you, because when you open your business the right way, it's good for your business. Like if you make sure you've got the right skills in place for the things that you're going to be doing, that's just good for business too. So these are ways of having better business practices, but that will be May 21st.
Yeah, and I want to just note, I saw that Michelle put something in the chat about the catering business that is using their PPP loan as a capital investment. That is an option. So the PPP loan says, okay, if you want it forgiven, you need to use 75% of it on payroll. But they also say that there are other things that you can use that money for. It's just not going to get forgiven. So you could use it to pay rent or, your electricity bill, or, a couple of other things. I actually think that capital investment is one of the things that they said you can't use it for. So I'll have to go back and look at that. But there are other things that you can use it for. It's not going to be forgivable. It's going to get converted into a 2-year loan at, I think, 1% interest, which is low interest, but it's a really, really quick payoff period.
Mm-hmm.
So making the decision to use it that way, it's certainly a business decision that you can make, but it's definitely not what Congress intended that money to be used for.
Erich, when we're, oh my God, I had a question in my head and then it evaporated that fast. I hate it when that happens. Okay, no, I got it back. So when you're looking at this lumpy recovery that we're likely to have,
Mm-hmm.
how do we know who's creditworthy and who's not? Like, what's the lag time?
Yeah. So I think you may have heard of this. We took some specific steps at the Jewelers Board to kind of try to address that issue because we know that there's going to be a bunch of folks that they're, barring anything else, their credit rating is going to go in the toilet, right? Because if it's not paying or anything else. And so what we did is we did a couple of different things. One, we actually have changed our credit reports so that we now show the rating of the customer pre-COVID in addition to their current credit rating. So somebody who pulls that credit report can make their own decision of, oh, okay, they were absolutely a prompt payer pre-COVID, and okay, they're a little slower now. Well, I guess that makes sense, right? I mean, and they can use use that to the thing. We also have all of our participants, they're providing us their data. Basically, we look at it as clean as possible. Basically, don't change your data before it gets to us, and we'll take a look at it and see what that data really means in terms of how that'll work. We will stop doing that at some point. We have some sort of internal metrics we're using to see when that will go back to the way it was, but it's not going to go back in the short run, we don't think.
What do you think short run means?
Who knows? I mean, this is a little bit theoretical, I guess, but the problem you run into is everybody's hoping for like a breakthrough, right? And if a breakthrough comes, that's great. But what happens is you end up, by definition, very lumpy recoveries because something will happen that is considered like a breakthrough. The remdesivir thing just 2 weeks ago, right, or a week ago, where it caused the stock market to shoot way up, right? That's the way people kind of look at things, right? It's, this is it. This is the solution. And it's like, no, this won't be. This is medical stuff that's complicated, takes a while. There's going to be false paths. There's going to be highs and lows, and it's going to be lumpy. It's just going to be lumpy coming back. And it's regionally lumpy.
I read something interesting the other day, and I thought that is so true. Scientists are used to writing for each other. There's usually no more than 50 people that are interested in what they're talking about, right? So they write for each other. They have the same set of assumptions. They understand the same set of conditions. It's like when two jewelers talk to each other about the challenges of working with rose gold versus yellow gold. We understand why those are challenging, but nobody listening in gets that. So scientists are used to writing for each other. Suddenly, everybody's publishing what they're writing to each other, and none of us understand the assumptions. And so this crazy psychological...
Right. And scientists understand that science is a process towards reducing uncertainty.
Right.
Right. And it's this sort of squiggly line going down of reducing uncertainty. And we're expecting this eureka moments, right? Science solved it. Hey, we're done. Right. And I think the better analog, people kind of look back at the 2008 recession and say, okay, is that an analog we can look at? And it's like, no, we can't. The analog you can look at is the HIV crisis.
30.
And really go back and figure out, okay, remember they thought, okay, there's no way we're going to solve this. And it was, no, we did solve it. No, we didn't solve it. Okay. And then it ended up actually not even being a cure, but a treatment. Mm-hmm. I'm not saying that's going to be the case here. I'm not saying it at all. If it's a virus, they'll probably come up with a vaccine. But overall, that's a better model to look at in terms of, okay, it's going to be lumpy.
Yeah. It's going to be lumpy, and it's not going to be short.
No.
And, I think from our perspective, this is a fundamental change in the way that we do business in the jewelry industry. It's a fundamental change in the way that I do my job. Yeah. And I'm just one measly lawyer, working out of her apartment in New York City. And I think about how many other people aren't lucky enough to have a job that they can take home and do completely online. And, and I feel very fortunate to have the opportunity to do that. But I think one of our responsibilities in this industry has always been looking back into our supply chain and making sure that everybody in the supply chain is taken care of. It's going to take a long time to get back to a level where we're not just supporting ourselves and our employees and our families, but we're also supporting all of our suppliers and all of the people who depend on our full, long, robust supply chain in the industry.
So true. And what we consider a big business in the jewelry industry is still almost always a small business. And then if you want to push all the way back in our supply chain, our materials come from the most vulnerable populations all over the world that are struggling right now to figure out how to feed themselves. So we've got to, if we want this industry to be healthy, we have to look for industry health across the entire vertical.
It's not just going to be what's happening in New York, what's happening on 47th Street, what's happening in the diamond districts in Philadelphia and Chicago and LA, it's going to be, are people able to cut and polish diamonds in Surat? Not right now. So there's not a supply of natural diamonds unless you have a relationship with somebody who has some stock that they've been sitting on. And I actually think it's good. I'm very curious to see if this will move stock that hasn't moved
Well, we are seriously
previously.
leveraged. I mean, that would be a cool result, I think.
I think so. But of course, I think that means being creative about how you use products.
Okay, so let's talk about technology because
Yeah.
being creative about how we use products right now means learning to use some combination of tech and
Hmm.
in person to deliver. Now, we're having lots of other discussions about how to do that, but there are
Yeah.
some real risks. There are risks about how we take credit cards. There are risks about how we run out to cars and deliver materials. So let's talk about some of those risks and concerns and what people should be doing.
Yeah. So from our perspective, on the tech side, yeah, there's tons of opportunity. But obviously that you can get into realms that can get you into trouble really fast as well, right? So the classic example that you can run into, for example, is if you decide, oh, I'm going to open up an online store, right? And I'm just going to go do that. And all of a sudden you've never done business outside of the state, and all of a sudden you're doing business all across the country, and you might have some tax issues and other things that get launched that you never even considered would hit you, and you may not even be aware of until it's too late. Um, there is, as soon as you do open up on the online piece of it, you have the PCI and other types of compliance that you have to be aware of that maybe you weren't fully aware of if you didn't have that kind of thing. The interesting thing I've seen, again, this is from outside of the jewelry industry, is there are a whole bunch of folks that are trying to go online, and what they're trying to do is trying to recreate the in-store experience by going online. And you look at that and you go, that's not the right way to do it.
Model. That's right.
Because
That's right.
people that would go and spend hundreds and hundreds of dollars to have somebody do a 3D rendering of their store so that someone can do a virtual walkthrough. I mean, I kind of look at that and go, okay, that seems like a security risk all in on of its own, because you've just gotten a nice map of your store. But secondly, it's sort of like, that's not, if someone's online, that's not the experience they're looking for. They're looking for something else. So there's certainly an educational component about that as well.
Let's come back and talk about paradigm shifts also, because I think that's very important. But Carol has a question. She wants somebody to explain what PCI compliance is.
Keep your credit cards safe. I mean, it's basically, I mean, it's making sure that you're not losing customer information when you're transacting with them. I mean, it's like, Sarah's probably got a much better handle on that one than I do, but
Sarah's going to make a face that says no.
Oh,
but,
okay.
Dror sent me a couple of notes on that. He was very concerned.
Oh, great.
That. So Dror was saying, first of all, that the risk of fraudulent transactions is extremely high right now. Partly because opportunistic people see crises as an opportunity, partly because generally people who would never do anything bad are desperate. And so that combination of desperation and opportunism makes the environment ripe for fraud. And when people go for fraud, they tend to buy high value items and then do a chargeback and try to keep the money and the item. So that's a common fraud technique. So he said, first of all, avoid taking credit card numbers over the phone. That over the phone are keyed in transactions, card not present transactions are the riskiest transactions. And make sure you're only using secured services. So what are those? Well, they're PCI DDS compliant services. So that it's your banks, it's the credit card system you use in your store is secure, but they'll tell you, if you notice, your protection's lower on the card not present transactions than it is on the ones where you swipe the card. Services, but they have ways of doing that online that are secure where the customer's entering the number. They also, PayPal, Amazon Pay, Stripe, they're all PCI DDS compliant services as well. So he said, make sure you're using those. And if you're doing curbside deliveries, make sure you are collecting the payment in advance, not trying to do something at the car. That's security
Mhm.
and credit carefulness.
Yep.
So those were a couple things Dror wanted me to make sure I shared.
Yeah, I would also say that just here in New York City, obviously there's a lot of, most businesses are closed, but anything that sells food is still open. And a number of the smaller establishments that I've been going to, like my local bakery and things like that, have a setup now. They're only allowing one person in the store at a time, or one family unit in the store at a time. They have the entire front entrance is blocked off, so you can only stand in a very small spot. They have a list of what's available, and then they have their credit card reader right there, and it's more than 6 feet away from the employee. And so the reader is near you, and the screen, the iPad or whatever it is that they're using to see the transaction and to enter in the information is by them, and it is physically distant. And so you put your little chip card, into the reader near you, and then they get all the information remotely. So I think, obviously this is a bakery. The most expensive item is, maybe $10. But this is, I think, an interesting model for showing how retail environments can handle payment systems. I think it's going to be more physically separated. And most people aren't requiring a signature for this, especially if you have a chip card. And I think, honestly, it's just a matter of like pens. Do you want to sit there and clean each pen individually every single time somebody uses it? No, I think you probably want to just get a chip card read.
Yep.
Is that secure enough for high value jewelry transactions?
That's a great question that I don't know the answer to,
Yeah. Yeah,
but
I don't know. I mean, I would assume that, again, from a technological perspective, this will drive a much more adoption of things like Apple Pay and other things, basically touchless payment systems, right? And especially for some of those higher dollar items, you just come in and that is secure, so it's fingerprint.
What about the security aspects of like delivering to cars? And I keep worrying about this. Like, what about somebody telling their employee, okay, you run out to the car and make this delivery, but then the employee gets hurt while trying to hand off something to the car? Like, do we have to worry about legal exposure in these areas? And never mind the fact that we have to worry about our employees. We don't just do it for legal reasons, but are there legal things to be concerned about?
absolutely, if an employee got hurt while making a delivery of something, that would be considered a workers' compensation claim. So that would have certainly affect your workers' comp insurance, and be something like that. It is definitely a consideration. I've heard of a couple of people doing, drop off, of remote sales and things like that. And honestly, the only people I know who are doing it are the owners of the business. They're taking the liability on themselves to make the deliveries. I think, partially because they have to, because it's their responsibility, but also because they don't want to make employees, you know,
Yeah.
put employees in a potentially dangerous situation.
Well,
So if you're going to consider doing that, I would think about, who's going to take on the responsibility. And then, the Jewelers Security Alliance has put out tons of information over the last few weeks about, security with stores and making sure, you're not being followed and things like that. And I would look to them for more guidance in this area as well.
yeah, because we're not used to being delivery businesses. So, I mean, the conditions around, taking product and delivering them to customers, it's not our thing. Do you know if the Jeweler Security Alliance was addressing that specifically? Like, what does it mean to get in our car and drive someplace and deliver?
I think they have, and certainly I know that Jewelers Mutual, in terms of their insurance policies, has been talking to people about what kind of activities are covered under your insurance. So I would make sure that that's clear as well.
Okay. Somebody's asking about what about having a courier deliver to clients?
It's, I should stress again that, everything that I'm saying today is not legal advice. This is just education and information. But, if you are directing somebody to do something on your behalf, generally you're responsible for something that happens to that person. Courier services can be a little bit different because you contract out that, right? And so it would just depend on what your relationship is with the courier service and what that legal requirement says.
And also what their insurance rider is. I
Exactly.
mean, certainly you want to make sure that you have a copy of their insurance.
Yes. Make sure that they are insured and bonded for certainly.
Yep. What about other aspects of starting to use technology in ways people haven't used it before in terms of opening up? What should we, because we're not just talking about opening up, we are talking about doing business very differently. So now we're jumping into things we don't know.
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously, it sounds like a broken record, but this whole concept of moving things more to an online fashion, whether it's direct or it's omni-channel in terms of using it as part of an overall thing. I mean, I have a mother-in-law who's over 80 years old who regularly used to go to Tiffany's just as an excursion, and now she's learned how to pre-shop online for Tiffany's, and you never would have thought in a million years that would happen, but it happened, and now that's not going back, right? She's not going to stop doing that. That's a activity she's learned and everything else. And I think the technology extends well beyond even retail, right? That the concept that more and more of the upstream partners and the vendors and the supply chain now are embracing the concept of, okay, we're going to be doing things online now. We've got a couple of long-term Jewelers Board members who basically were not online at all. Like their computers were not even connected to the internet at all, which actually led to some problems with us. But they are now saying, okay, how do we do this? How do we get this up and running and online so we can transact with our folks? And at a higher level, what that means is that the information flows are going to happen a lot faster. And when the information flows faster, we call that velocity, transparency goes up, which means the industry is going to have to get ready to, over time, stuff is going to change because this flow and this velocity and transparency is going to change how things happen upstream. As you go along.
Well, and it already has been, right? I mean, the internet has made all industries more transparent than they ever were before. But so the jewelry industry is not particularly transparent. How is it going to affect the way we look at doing business? What people start thinking about?
Yeah, I mean, I will tell you, I was shocked when I came on board at the lack of transparency. Like, I didn't know it was possible that an industry could
still stay opaque.
Be that opaque when there was that much internet going on, right? I mean, it was to me, it was kind of hard to fathom that, but it was true. But now there's really no choice, and as I've said many times, it's a one-way street. Once folks start transacting online and in a transparent and rapid fashion, it does not go back to the old way. You'll always say, the pendulum will swing a little bit. People will say, oh, Amazon's opening up brick and mortar stores, right? Sure. But overall, it's a one-way street.
So when people are uncomfortable with transparency, there's usually two reasons going on that they speak about. One is, then they'll know how much taxes I owe. Okay, we're not going to talk about that because that's just pay your taxes. But when it comes to the other thing, it tends to be somebody might find out who my suppliers are. Like this worry about people. So let's talk about, is that really such a bad thing if people know who your suppliers are? And what are the ramifications? And what do you have to do as a business? Because we're not saying, we want you to start sharing who your suppliers are because it's transparent. We're saying this is going to happen. So now, what do you think are the negative repercussions, and what might you do to take advantage of it instead of stress over?
I think you just have to recognize your world is changing, right? And that, the concept of, what is so bad about them knowing your suppliers? Well, okay, so some of your competitors might have the same suppliers. Well, that means that on your end, you're going to have to make yourself more relevant in a different way. If your relevancy was you were the only one who knew who the supplier was, well, that relevancy is gone. So now you're going to have to figure out a way that makes yourself stand out from the crowd in a different way. And even when it comes to price transparency, right? It's sort of, okay, now you might lose a little bit in profits because the price transparency is not what it used to be.
But you don't have
to. You don't have to if you are marketing yourself and positioning yourself in such a way that says, no, you're a value add. Yeah. So it's a different world that I think folks are going to have to get used to. And I think they're going to have to learn to become adaptable. That's one of the key things, is because it's a world that you won't necessarily control, and it's a world that moves at a lot faster pace
Mm-hmm.
than the jewelry industry used to, at least from what I could tell from the outside.
I think that's really true, and it's just on a personal level, I have certainly I'm in a privileged position to be able to go to trade shows and see the inner workings of the jewelry industry, and pick up materials myself that I'm interested in and then get them made into jewelry. And it's obviously I'm a jewelry consumer. I'm a woman in America, and it's one of the jewelers that I work with a lot. At the beginning of the pandemic, I had a couple of, stones and things sitting around, and I was like, hey, I still have an income, and, I want to work with you and support you. Do we want to make some of these custom pieces we've been sitting on for a while? We did a consultation over Zoom. It was an hour and a half. And it was awesome because we talked about all of these different design ideas and, spent time trying to figure out what we wanted to do with these pieces. And, of course, a big part of that was the fact that I already had a relationship with this jeweler, and I knew what her aesthetic was and her style was, and she's made me a number of pieces beforehand, and I trusted her. But also that is something that is accessible to any jewelry designer. You can set up a virtual appointment with your customer, even if your customer is a retailer, and be like, hey, let's talk about all of these things that we said that we were going to do. Obviously plans have changed. Let's work on it together and see what we can do. Technology is there and it can help you. And I think, as I said, I have a relationship with this jeweler. I think it would be a challenge to do that with a new customer. But what an exciting challenge to try to figure out how to take your brand aesthetic and your skill set and make them applicable and be able to show off your work in a digital setting. I think that as this continues, trade shows further and further out on the calendar are getting canceled right now. And so I think the traditional ways of showing off your products and what we can do are not going to exist for quite some time. So we have to reinvent how we're going to show off our skill sets and the products that we make. And I think that that's, it's going to take some really interesting things. We can look to sort of the fashion industry to see how they're doing it. Some of them have done online fashion shows. Some people are doing sort of hosted conversations with the brands. There's all kinds of options out there, but you're going to need to figure out new ways to get your products to your customers using technology.
Well, and also remember, I mean, the whole heart of strategy is that you have to have both competitive advantage and differentiation. One without the other isn't enough to get you, isn't enough to get anyone to say, oh, they cost a little more, but they're worth it. So you need both. But what you're saying, Sarah, reminds me of something. I was talking with Jules Kim yesterday. She's a designer in New York. And she was saying, usually my process was I would work on the selling process with the customer, get a deposit, then I'd go privately into my design process and bring something back to them. She said, that's on its ear now. Now what I'm doing is bringing the customer into the design process much, much earlier. And we're just starting to co-design and learning to engage that way. And yes, using things like video and, not just trying to send an email here and there. So she's shifting her paradigm about how she works. And remember, it's not just what we sell that gives us differentiation and competitive advantage. It includes all the things like how we sell and how we service it. So,
yeah, I mean,
and
I was deciding whether we wanted to silverback some aquamarines, and my jeweler sent me photos of each option and was like, okay, tell me what you like more, before she moved on to the next phase of that. And that it makes me feel like I'm part of the process. And as obviously I'm in a very privileged position as a consumer to know a whole lot more about this than most consumers do, but it was exciting for me to be involved in that. And it's going to make that piece more meaningful because it'll feel like I had some decisions in making it.
yeah, and I was just going to mention that on the more boring distribution and sort of manufacturing side, we are getting feedback from our clients that basically they're discovering by now getting comfortable both themselves and their customers on Zoom, they can cover 8 to 10 customer meetings a day when they used to only be able to do 4 because everybody was insisting on doing it in person. And not only that, if they've got to drag in the president of the company as an escalation point, they can bring them right into the meeting and it's not a big deal. And so, that's another model that from a technology perspective, that's not going to go away.
Not going to. People are changing their Salesforce strategy already. On June 4th, we're going to talk about connecting with your customers online, specifically emotional proximity when you're not in the same room. And then on June 18th, we are going to present on mixing live and virtual in your selling strategy. So, because these are paradigm shifts.
Yep.
So I'm just going to have you guys come back with me every week, okay?
Okay.
You're doing great. Sara, you were saying something just a moment ago about how, but of course I'm privileged. I'm in the jewelry industry. I know it, but doesn't that increase your understanding of the value of things beyond the component cost?
Oh, absolutely. I know that when I'm having work made, or even when I'm just purchasing things, myself, now I would say 100% of the time I know who's made this jewelry, and I know something about them. I know the training that they went through to become a graduate gemologist, or to, learn how to become a bench jeweler, or, all of the years of design history that they have, and all of the time and energy that they've put into their business. And of course, like, being able to step back into the supply chain is about assurance that I know that the people that I work with are sourcing from legitimate businesses who aren't contributing to, money laundering or financing terrorism, which of course is a huge concern in the jewelry industry, whether we like that or not. Jewelry and the components are easily convertible, small objects that can be turned into millions of dollars. So it's certainly valuable to me to know that it's not just about, the gold alloy that's going into the product, or, the stones that I bought from an AGTA dealer, or, whatever. It's also about knowing that all of those places where people are getting their products are coming from a legitimate supply chain.
Which goes back to Eric's point about transparency and velocity. So, in fact, we can take this additional transparency and turn it into greater margin.
Mm-hmm.
Good for our credit ratings, because then we can pay our bills.
Right. Right.
We are getting close to the end of the hour. Sara has to leave us at 2. She told me she has a hard stop. So I want your questions in here so we can, please don't make Erich and I try to field your legal questions.
No.
But get
No.
your questions in here so we can answer them. Were you going to try and say something, Erich?
Well, I was going to, once again, if you want, I can share that one piece of good news that I shared with you before this thing. So, everybody talks about there's really, really bad news in the jewelry industry and everything else. And we keep looking for where are the bright spots, what's good, what's out there. And we did discover one good one just yesterday. And hopefully this will come across for everybody. We looked at how much jewelry was being searched on Google. And this is a graph that goes all the way back for a past 5 years. And the trees are there's Christmas trees, and the hearts are Valentine's Day, obviously. But if you look at the tulips, which are Mother's Day, you can see right above my head that, for when the COVID crisis struck, the search for jewelry dropped off a cliff, went nowhere. But now for Mother's Day, it's come right back to where it was. And so, I kind of looked at that as being kind of hopeful for the future of where we're going. I don't know how they're buying this stuff, but, obviously the interest is there, right? So.
That is good news. And it was right up there with the previous search.
Yes.
Jewelry is resilient to recessions, apparently, of every type. It always has been. When we did our jewelry history session a couple of weeks ago, it was clear people bought jewelry all the way through World War I, the Great Depression, Spanish flu was in the middle of all of that, and World War II, and jewelry just kept selling. So jewelry is going to sell. As Laura is saying, art is recession proof. I hope so because it's a humanity proofer as well. Somebody's just, Michelle Pajak Reynolds is telling us she just had a big Mother's Day sale to a longtime client via Instagram direct messaging. And that's got her up 25% for the year. Good job, Michelle.
There you go.
You also build really good relationships with your customers, and clearly that's coming through for you. Other questions? Just kind of watching the leaderboard here, see if we've got more questions coming in for you guys. Sarah and Eric, any particular thoughts that you would like to make sure this group leaves with as we wrap up the session today?
I would just say, again, planning, writing down what your plan is, and being thoughtful about reopening. Don't rush into it just because you're allowed to. Make sure you're making the right decision for you, for your business, for your employees, and for your customers.
Yeah. And what I would say is it's a bit of more of a self-serving pitch, but for those who are not listed with the Jewelers Board, I know in the past sometimes we've been kind of looked at as either a black box or the boogeyman or something like that. Actually, now is a great time to get listed with the Jewelers Board because as we come out of the recovery, these distributors and manufacturers and other folks are going to be looking for new folks to get in contact with, and just being listed with us allows them to do that. And actually, the more information we have, the better someone is. Typically, having more information doesn't hurt you; it actually helps you. So I would really strongly recommend they do that.
Well, and also, I mean, as an industry, we're lucky to have the Jewelers Board because they're more actively engaged in what it means to be in the jewelry business, whereas
Yeah.
these other credit boards just don't have the same kind of insights.
No, and getting listed is free. It doesn't cost anything. So,
Yeah. Any other questions from the audience? You guys are a pretty tame bunch today. Okay, then just a little bit of wrap up. First, could Eric possibly refresh the info he mentioned earlier about e-commerce and the use of virtual products?
So I think they're referring to the virtual tour stuff that I was talking about. The only thing I would say about e-commerce is, obviously, if it's something you're looking to get into, the good news is 10 years ago it was really hard, or at least harder for particularly let's call it a mom and pop to get involved. But now there's so many commerce platforms out there, whether you're talking about Shopify or BigCommerce or WooCommerce or any of those guys. It's a lot easier. I think my point that I was making earlier was there was a lot of folks who were trying to virtually recreate walking into the store, and that's not what you want to do in an online experience. An online experience is searching, categorization, taxonomy, all that kind of stuff so that folks can easily find what they're looking for, not walking around in a 3D experience, I think.
Yep. Okay, so I think we're wrapping up now. I don't see any more questions. So first, I want to thank Sara Yood from the JVC and Erich Jacobs from JBT. We've got our rhyming acronyms on board today for joining me. This has been a really fun conversation. I so appreciate you bringing your deep knowledge and compassion to the jewelry industry. I think we all appreciate you for that. I want to thank MJSA for producing this webinar series. If you want to see past webinars of all the free ones we've been doing for the COVID crisis, they are on the MJSA website. You can click a link and watch them instantly. Coming up, May 21st, business mapping. Sounds boring? Isn't. It's really cool. It'll help you figure out where you're missing value components in your business and where you've got some exposure, legal, economic, all of that. So business mapping on the 21st. May 28th, we're going to talk about money. Let's talk about money. Eric, I was going to call you and see if you want to join us again for that one. So Take a look at your calendar. June 4th, we're going to talk about connecting with customers online and specifically emotional proximity, the psychology of marketing and how we apply that. June 11th, we're going to talk about prospecting like you've not thought of it before, like we don't usually think about it in the jewelry industry, using sales funnels and social media and lead generation and lead magnets and all the cool things you can do easily now to find new customers. And then on June 18th, mixing live and virtual in your selling strategies going forward. And finally, June 25th, cybersecurity for your business. We're going to talk about it at the level that most jewelry businesses are, not at the giant corporate, I'm Walmart worrying about cybersecurity. So that's the lineup for the next 6 weeks. It's going to be pretty good. Oh, next week we're going to talk about the new retail forecast because retail has been changing already. Now COVID-19 is likely to change it even more. We're going to talk about the retail future. So that's our lineup. Hope we see you in the weeks to come. Thanks again, Sara and Erich, very much for your time. Thanks, NJSA. You guys be safe out there. Wear your face masks. It's not for you. It's for everybody else. And let's go be a better industry.